We invite you to join us for the 31st Annual Graduate Symposium in Renaissance Art at Syracuse University, Florence, an event that is free and open to the public and that will be held on Thursday, November 30th, starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon local time. At the symposium, our graduate students present the results of their capstone research projects in individual 20-minute papers. These presentations are the results of a full year spent in Florence researching in local archives, museums, and libraries. If you're unable to join us for the symposium on November 30th, you can connect via live streaming. Instructions on how to do that will be posted on the homepage of the Syracuse University Florence website or the Facebook page of the Syracuse University Florence Master's Program in Renaissance Art. Let's listen to the graduate students describing their research projects.
My research focuses on Jacopo Tintoretto's Last Supper, completed between 1592 and 1594 for Lucca Cathedral. This altarpiece, along with other works created by mostly a group of Tuscan artists, were part of a series of radical changes made to the interior of Lucca Cathedral at the end of the Cinquecento and are still in place today. Notes from a meeting of the Lucchese church officials held in 1595, 1 year after the altarpiece arrived and was installed, suggest that the opera was dissatisfied with the work and sought to replace it. By seeking to determine possible explanations for the church's dissatisfaction, I address unanswered questions such as why Tintoretto, the only Venetian artist, was chosen to contribute, and secondly, how his Lucchese Last Supper fits into the purposes of the 1590s renovations and the resulting altarpiece cycle. This study contributes to scholarship on Tintoretto by focusing on a virtually understudied work in a Venetian context.
In the 7 novitiate cells at the Dominican convent of San Marco, Florence, there are frescoes by Fra Angelico depicting Christ on the cross with Saint Dominic in prayer at its base. In each fresco, Christ bleeds profusely, the blood from his hands dripping in large drops, the blood from his side wound flowing down towards Dominic, and the blood from his feet rolling along the ground in mesmerizing rivulets. In my capstone presentation, I explore the responses that this representation of blood may have elicited from its audience of Dominican novitiates, adolescents training to become fully fledged members of the Dominican order. I place the frescoes within the context of Dominican theology on the divinity of Christ's blood, within the context of the perceived occurrence of miraculously bleeding crucifixes in late medieval Tuscany, and within the context of monastic bloodletting. In doing so, I shed new light on the decoration at San Marco, and also on the depiction of blood in Italian Renaissance art.
Renaissance portraits of children were painted to record family history, articulate social status, and sometimes to facilitate diplomatic exchange. My research began with analysis of the Cinquecento portraits of the children of the Florentine Duke Cosimo de' Medici. 9 paintings by Bronzino and Salviati use unusual attributes to depict the development of the second son Giovanni in surprising ways. It took surveying hundreds of portraits to realize that Giovanni's images are atypical not only within his family, but also among other European princes. Giovanni alone was positioned for a dual destiny as a prince of the church in Rome or the Duke of Florence. I found that significant patterns of representation could only be uncovered by looking at these images as a series. This fresh methodology reveals that important findings about portraits and political maneuvering can be made through comparative analysis.
For my capstone paper, I've been researching a Florentine image from the late 1480s by the artist Francesco Bottocini, which depicts the Archangel Raphael and Tobias. Paintings of the pair were popular in late 15th century Florence. However, what makes this painting unusual, if not unique, is the portrait of a young boy kneeling in prayer in the bottom left corner. My research proposes that this portrait is a posthumous depiction of Raffaello Doni, the eldest son in a family of wool merchants. My reasoning for this is based upon an iconographic analysis, for beside the boy's head is a European goldfinch and a thistle. I argue that in the Renaissance, the bird and plant will not only have held connotations of Christ's resurrection and passion, but a contemporary viewer would have recognized them as emblems of death. In my paper, I then place these findings in the context of childhood commemoration and the Archangel's role in securing heavenly salvation.
My capstone project is on Giovanna Garzoni, a remarkable and understudied female still life painter of the 17th century. She worked in Florence from 1642 to 1651. It was during this period that Garzoni created the paintings I am studying, which include insects rendered with anatomical details only visible under a microscope. By positively identifying these insects, my investigation uncovered important implications in Garzoni's representation of bees and wasps. Garzoni had significant ties to the Roman scientific group called the Academy of the Lynxes. The earliest microscope was invented by Galileo in 1624 and presented to this group and used for the anatomical study of a honeybee in 1625. My research demonstrates that not only did Garzoni have access to that microscopic study of a bee, but that it influenced and inspired her representation of other flying buzzing insects during her time here in Florence. Giovanna Garzoni was an exceptional woman with diverse capabilities as an artist, illustrator, and scientist in her own right.
When thinking about a capstone topic, I was immediately drawn to the image of the Black African Magus in Andrea Mantegna's Adoration of the Magi. What makes this altarpiece panel striking is its anatomically correct camels, its multi-ethnic retinue, and the prominent position of a Black African king kneeling prominently in the foreground. When I started researching what could have prompted such an image, I realized studies on the Black African Magus were primarily focused on the northern tradition, with little mention of Italy. This inspired my research question of why did this Black African king first appear in a work by Mantegna, and why was it located in a court in Mantua in the early 1460s before the rest of Italy? My paper is divided into 3 sections to answer this question. I begin by designating what makes this panel unique, then describe the significance of the artist and patron collaboration, and finally argue that this adoration is a symbol of global Christianity.